was he had written down his experiences, as I told you, several times, like the whole thing from beginning to end. And they were almost identical. There would be a few more details maybe in one. There were a few little discrepancies, like in one of the things he said it was an old Italian man that sewed his pants, but in the other ones it was an old Italian woman, and that actually makes more sense anyway. I don't know how many old Italian men would have been offering to sew someone's pants, but so things like that, but they were basically identical. So he had done this time and time again. So I thought, well, one of my jobs was to go through all of these and pull out the story and put it into one story rather than all these pieces with more details in some than the other. And as George started talking and did become more comfortable and starting off with the kids after this event, this book launch, he said that really what it was that he had post-traumatic stress disorder, quite understandably. That wasn't talked about in those days. But what would happen when the memories would start coming back and it would start really bothering him really a lot, he would just write the whole thing out. And that was really, really a healthy technique. And that's one of the purposes of memoir, is actually to resolve old conflicts. And sometimes people bury it away and they don't want to talk about it at all, but he had an outlet. And then he started telling stories, like he was walking up Granville Street and he ran into an old army buddy. This was fairly soon after the war, so they decided to go into a bar and have a drink, and the guy, I just popped a beer can. There was like a loud bang, and there was an old man sitting at the table next to them, and him and his buddy jumped and got underneath the table. And the old guy looked down at them and said, "It's okay, boys. You can come out now. The same thing happened to me after the last one." So things like that. And Paula, his wife, that he was talking about, and you saw in the film, was actually a nurse, and actually spent some time working as a psychiatric nurse as well. So she was really helpful to him, and he was having nightmares and all of that, but it was reliving the experience. That's when he recorded them. And again, that is one of the things, one of the really valuable things about memoir. When you go to workshops, writing workshops and things like that, time and time again, you'd think that writing a memoir or an autobiography, you have to be Justin Trudeau or Steve Hatfield or Chris Hadfield or somebody like that, if you're the President of the United States. But really, there is a kind of snobbishness about it, but really anybody could do it. As I said, George had dropped out of school when he was 14 years old, and he was really, marginally literate, you would say. He kept saying pretty. He used the word pretty all the time, and it was P-R-I-T-Y. It was a pretty good day. I mean, there were a lot of words like that, and sometimes I had to really kind of struggle and sound out, what is it he's saying? Like punctuation, forget it, sentences didn't exist, things like that. But as you can tell, he was a great storyteller, and the story was there. So he got it down on paper, and that's really the important thing. So don't be intimidated by it, just write it all down, and then you can deal with it later. So, and memoir can be the basis for poetry, novels. Ivan Coyote, some of you know, like her books, she calls them novels, but she'll say in workshops, they're all really based on memoir that she has written down her experiences. So my role in this whole thing was really to transcribe what George had written. I had to act sort of as a coach to him, and sometimes a counselor, and an editor, and also hired a copy editor. Although I just noticed today, I found a little error in there. A fact checker, I spent a lot of time doing that. There's a lot of, when George wrote his book, it was a lot of, the LST and the LSI, and, I mean, I had to get out books from the Second World War and go through all of these books. LST is a landing ship troop, and the LSI, landing ship infantry, stuff like that. The whole manuscript was full of things like that. In fact, there was a funny story. My husband, who's here, invited we had this old German neighbor, and he came over, and the old coffee table was full of all these books, of weapons of the Second World War. And he just kind of walked into the living room. My husband had asked him, in for a drink or something. It was Christmas time, and he just, he was just took his breath away. And then he said he had been in the German army. Why would anybody want to write about the war, but things like that, and all of the weapons that he talks about there. And I got into, there was one thing, and of course, if George wasn't, his English skills weren't the best, but there was another thing he was talking about, this orgy, this black flag, but he had to name something else, and I was researching online, couldn't find this word anywhere, and I was searching online, and then I actually got an email from somebody at the U.S. Naval Academy, and yeah, sorry? Budgie, is that what it is? Okay, but anyway, he wrote and explained what it was, like there was a submarine had gone down, and so things like that. It was a lot of time doing that kind of research. And so people are really intimidated by writing, and really just get it down, and then you can deal with those issues afterwards. When George started putting it together, it was really, like I say, for his family, and I convinced him that really his story was interesting, but also it's a part of Canadian history, and a lot of people didn't write about their experiences. So, by publishing it, it would become a part of the record. And he thought about this, and one of the big barriers, like I say, were his writing skills. He was really, really embarrassed about that, and we talked about that a lot. And I thought, I don't really care. I was an educator. I mean, I really can't understand what you're saying. So he sort of got over that. And Paula, his wife, was always very, very protective of him. And the first several times that I went to their house, she was always there, making sure everything was going to be okay. And then once she decided to go out, and he said to me, really, what do this whole thing I've written here, and one of the things that really bothered him, he said, is, do you think I said too many times in here that I was afraid going, before the invasion, going into Sicily, and jumping into 5 feet of water with, machine guns pointing at him. And I said, no, George, I think, you sound like you're a human being, right? They're really. One of his friends, one of the guys from the pictures, had been in some action before that, and he really had reason to be afraid. And like I said, George, really, what courage is that you are afraid, but you do the right thing anyway, so that got to be a big hurdle, and so we got over that. So he was, like I say, really, really, really a great storyteller. And the style that is in the book, it's really his words, I did change some of them, like wrote things out more, but really in very, very minor ways, but it is his voice. And he has a really conversational style, and almost word for word at times, some of the things he was saying in the film. And it ended up getting a lot of really good reviews. One of the people who did read it for me was Mark Zelke, who's written several books about the Canadian military in the Second World War. Got a good review from Jack Gradesine in Legion magazine. And Norm Christie, he's the guy who does For King and Country. Turned out that he was a school buddy of my book designer, so that was kind of nice. And another one in another online review it got. And then one day we were away on holiday somewhere, and the 1-800 number that's in the book goes to my cell phone, and I answered the phone, and it was this man who sounded like he was like George's age, and he said that he'd been reading, he was in the Second World War, and he'd been reading military history since the end of the war, his whole life, like 60 years or whatever it was, really trying to understand what had happened to him and make sense of it and so on. And he said, this was the best book I ever read. And he said it was the most like his experience. And I think it's because George just wrote what he thought, wrote what he experienced. There's no sort of politics in it or anything else. So that made it actually really a positive